All right, so now we're going to go on part two of the question and answer portion of this AWS Security Specialty Exam portion, Addendum. All right, next. So, application servers behind an elastic load balancer accessed over HTTPS with data encrypted in transit. A security engineer is concerned about key exposure due to application vulnerabilities. Which approach protects external certificate during a breach? Generate an internal signed self-signed certificate and apply it to the instances. Use the AWS Certificate Manager for external certificate on the load balancer. Have the load balancer decrypt traffic and re-encrypt with an internal certificate. This approach isolates the external certificate on the load balancer managed by ACM from the application servers. Even if application servers are compromised, attackers cannot access the external certificate since it remains protected on the load balancer. Internal certificates on instances limit exposure scope. Identifying valid event sources that trigger AWS WAF rules with web access control lists. Which are valid event sources associated with web ACLs that trigger AWS WAF rules? Amazon CloudFront distribution and application load balancer. AWS WAF can be associated with CloudFront distributions and application load balancers to inspect HTTPS requests and apply web ACL rules. These services forward requests to WAF for inspection before allowing or blocking traffic based on configured rules. Users are unable to assume IAM roles in a target account. The identity account policy has incorrect resource ARN syntax. What should be done to enable the role assumption? You update the IAM policy in the identity account to the correct resource ARN. So it has the AWS IAM with the correct ID and the role and the job function of the role, say EKS node role, or something along those lines. The resource ARN in the identity account policy must specify the exact account ID and the role name in the target account. The wildcard ARN prevents successful role assumption. Correcting the ARN to include the specific target account ID enables proper cross-account access. S3 data encrypted with KMS CMK shared with vendors whose list changes weekly. They need efficient cross-account access control. What is the most efficient way to manage KMS CMK access control? Use KMS grants to manage key access. Programmatically create and revoke grants to manage vendor access. KMS grants provide temporary programmatic access control that can be created and revoked without modifying the base key policy. This is ideal for dynamic vendor lists as grants can be easily managed through APIs without policy updates for each vendor change. CloudTrail with SSE KMS encryption and log integrity validation. This digests files readable, but log files are not. What is the most likely cause? The KMS key policy does not grant the senior security engineer's IAM user or role permissions to decrypt with it. CloudTrail digests files are not encrypted with the same KMS key as the log files. When the log files are encrypted with the SSE KMS, users need explicit KMS decrypt permissions for the KMS key. Missing KMS permissions prevent log file access while digest files remain accessible. Corporate policy requires KMS communications to travel entirely within AWS network without using public endpoints. Which combination satisfies this requirement? Add the AWS source VPC endpoint condition to KMS key policy referencing the VPC endpoint ID. Create a VPC endpoint for KMS with the private DNS enabled. The VPC endpoint for the KMS routes traffic through the AWS private network, and the AWS source VPC endpoint condition in the key policy ensures the KMS access only occurs through the VPC endpoint, preventing public internet access to KMS services. A security engineer must identify the current Linux EC2 instances deployed with a compromised key pair. How can this be accomplished? Attain a list of instances by querying EC2s in the AWS CLI with the following command: AWS EC2 describe instances filters name equals key name, values equals key name here. The AWS CLI describe instances command with key name filter directly queries EC2 metadata to identify all instances currently using a specific key pair. This provides immediate identification of potentially compromised instances without requiring log analysis. Data processing application for 1,500 subsidiaries on EC2 behind a network load balancer. They must be accessible only to subsidiaries, not the public internet. Which solution implements the appropriate access restrictions? Create an AWS private link endpoint service in parent account and attach it to the network load balancer. Use private link interface endpoints and subsidiary accounts to connect to the application. AWS Private Link provides private connectivity between VPCs without exposing traffic to the internet. Each subsidiary can create interface endpoints to securely access the parent company's endpoint service, ensuring compliance with restricted access requirements. A security engineer must implement IAM policy restricting AWS services to US East 1 region for regulatory compliance. What policy should be implemented? A policy with the effect deny and the action underscore resource underscore and the condition string not equals. So AWS requested region US East 1. A deny policy with the string not equals condition on the AWS requested region effectively blocks all actions outside the specified region. This approach provides comprehensive regional restriction while allowing all services within the approved region. User data scripts contain sensitive information for EC2 Bootstrap. Information is viewable by unauthorized people. What is the most secure way to protect sensitive Bootstrap information? Store sensitive data in AWS Systems Manager parameter store using an encrypted string parameter and assign get parameters permission to the EC2 instance role. The parameters store with the secure string provides encrypted storage with automatic KMS encryption. EC2 instances can securely retrieve credentials during Bootstrap using IAM roles, eliminating sensitive data exposure in user data scripts while maintaining access logging. S3 data lake with millions of sensitive files requiring encryption in transit and at rest and protection even if the bucket becomes public. Which combination meets the requirements? Enable the default encryption with the server-side encryption with AWS KMS managed keys, that's SSE KMS, and add a bucket policy that includes deny if put object request does not include AWS secure transport. So the SSE KMS ensures data remains encrypted even if the bucket becomes public, since external parties lack KMS key access, and secure transport condition enforces the HTTPS for all uploads, ensuring encryption in transit. ECS vulnerability allows malicious code installation that exfiltrates data on port 5353. You need to identify the compromised hosts and stop data egress. How do you quickly identify the compromised hosts and stop the egress? Create a CloudWatch custom metric on VPC flow logs identifying egress traffic on port 5353. Update NACLs to block port 5353 outbound. VPC flow logs capture network traffic data and can be analyzed for specific ports. CloudWatch metrics enable monitoring and alerting on port 5353 traffic. Network ACLs provide subnet level blocking to immediately stop data exfiltration. EC2 instance denied access to KMS CMK for decrypt actions despite having KMS decrypt permissions and enabled CMK status. What's causing the issue? The KMS CMK key policy that enables IAM user permissions is missing. So KMS key policies must explicitly enable IAM policies to grant access. Without a statement allowing the account root or specific IAM principles in the key policy, IAM permissions alone cannot grant access to the CMK, regardless of the permissions in the IAM role. GuardDuty identifies FTP server with high client connections as a brute force attack. The finding is false positive, but keeps recurring. How do you improve the signal to noise ratio without compromising visibility? Add an FTP server to trusted IPs and to that trusted IP list and deploy it to GuardDuty to stop receiving notifications. GuardDuty trusted IP lists whitelist known good IP addresses, preventing findings generation for legitimate traffic. This reduces false positives while maintaining detection capabilities for actual threats from other sources. Protecting the AWS root user of newly opened account with the most secure methods. What are the most secure ways to protect the root user? Enable multi-factor authentication for AWS account root user. Do not create access keys for the AWS account root user. Instead, create an IAM user. So MFA adds a critical second factor authentication to the root user access and avoiding the root user access keys while using IAM users for daily operations follows AWS security best practices, minimizing root user exposure. You're migrating sensitive documents to S3 with requirements to encrypt each file using a different key to limit single key exposure impact. Which approach requires least configuration? Place all the files in the same S3 bucket. Use server-side encryption with the AWS KMS managed keys, that SSE KMS, to encrypt the data. SSE KMS automatically generates unique data encryption keys, EKs, for each object while using the same CMK. This provides per-object encryption with different keys with a minimal configuration, meeting the requirement without complex setup. An application developer has IAM policies allowing S3 bucket access but cannot access objects within the encrypted bucket. What's a possible cause? The S3 bucket policy fails to explicitly grant access to the application developer. Even with IAM permissions, S3 bucket policies can independently control access. If the bucket policy doesn't explicitly allow the developer's access or contains restrictive conditions, it can prevent object access despite adequate IAM permissions. A CloudFront distribution for dev.example.com requires HTTPS using custom TLS certificates imported to the certificate manager. Which combination ensures certificate availability in CloudFront console? Import the certificate in the region, US East 1. Ensure the certificate, private key, and certificate chain are PEM encoded. CloudFront requires certificates to be imported in US East 1 region for the custom domain HTTPS, and the ACM certificate manager accepts certificates in PEM format for import. These are fundamental requirements for CloudFront custom SSL certificates. S3 buckets encrypted, but all users with bucket access can retrieve any files. You need to limit each IAM user to assigned folders only. What should a security engineer do? Change the applicable IAM policy to grant S3 access to a resource in the ARN with the ARN AWS S3 with bucket per username folder, right? So using the AWS username variable in the IAM policy resource ARNs dynamically restricts each user to objects in their username-based folder. This provides user-specific access control without managing separate policies for each user. A popular web application connects to RDS MySQL in a private VPC subnet. And IT security suspects DDoS attacks from a specific IP. How can subnets be protected from this attack? Change the inbound NACL to deny access from the suspecting IP. NACLs operate at the subnet level and can explicitly deny traffic from specific IP addresses before it reaches security groups. This provides an additional security layer and can block suspicious traffic at the network perimeter. Designing a custom IAM policy allowing users to list S3 buckets only if they're MFA authenticated. Which policy best matches this requirement? This JSON policy with AWS multi-factor auth present with a true condition here shows effect allow S3 list my buckets S3 get bucket location, and the resource is AWS S3. And the Boolean condition says multi-factor authenticated present is true. So the AWS multi-factor authentication present condition key checks if the request was signed with MFA. Setting it to true ensures access is granted only when users have authenticated with MFA. The bool condition type is required for Boolean evaluation. S3 static websites hosting with JavaScript accessing resources in another S3 bucket. Users are getting blocked JavaScript errors. How can this be rectified? Enable CORS for the bucket. CORS, or cross-origin resource sharing, allows web applications running at one domain to access resources from another domain. Browsers block cross-origin requests by default. Configuring CORS on the target S3 bucket allows JavaScript from the source bucket to access resources. A vendor needs temporary access to an AWS resource. If you want to restrict access using a policy just for that user over a brief period. Which policy type is ideal? An inline policy. Inline policies maintain strict one-to-one relationships between policy and principal. They're ideal for temporary user-specific permissions as they're embedded in the user and automatically deleted when the user is removed, preventing accidental permission assignments to other users. A company requirement is to monitor all root user activity by notification. How can this best be achieved? Create CloudWatch events rules and use a Lambda function. CloudWatch events can detect root user activity from CloudTrail logs and trigger Lambda functions. The Lambda function can process the event and send notifications via SNS. This provides automated real-time monitoring of root user activities. A company wants secure ways of generating, storing, and managing cryptographic keys with exclusive access. Which service can be used? CloudHSM. CloudHSM provides dedicated hardware security modules where customers have exclusive control over encryption keys. Unlike KMS, where AWS manages the HSM infrastructure, CloudHSM gives exclusive access to FIPS 140-2 Level 3 validated HSMs for strict regulatory compliance. All right. A website must be accessible for HTTPS traffic and port 22 for admin from static IP 203.0.113.1/32. Which security group configurations are most secure but functional? Port 443 coming from 0.0.0, the all IPs, and port 22 coming from 203.0.113.1/32. So the HTTPS traffic requires port 443 open to all internet users. That's the 0.0. And SSH administrative access should be restricted to only the administrator's specific IP address following least privilege principle. EC2 instance logs need proper storage with limited access to log file destination. How can this be accomplished? Stream log files to separate CloudWatch log groups. Create IAM policies that give desired level of access to CloudWatch log groups. So CloudWatch logs provide centralized log management for EC2 instances, and IAM policies can control access to specific log groups, enabling fine-grained access control for log data. The EC2 instance in private subnet needs to access KMS service while maintaining security. Which method fulfills this requirement? Use a VPC endpoint. VPC endpoints for KMS allow private subnet instances to access KMS services without Internet Gateway or NAT Gateway. Traffic stays within AWS network, providing secure, private connectivity to KMS without exposing instances to Internet threats. A website behind CloudFront needs protection against SQL injection and cross-site scripting attacks. Which service can help? AWS WAF. WAF is a web application firewall that protects against common web exploits, including SQL injection and cross-site scripting attacks. It integrates with CloudFront distributions to inspect HTTP and HTTPS requests and blocks malicious traffic based on configurable rules. IT audit department requests a list of all resources defined across AWS account. How can this be achieved in the easiest manner? Use AWS config to get a list of all resources. Config automatically discovers and inventories AWS resources across all regions and services. It provides a comprehensive view of resource configuration and relationships, making it the most efficient tool for audit and compliance reporting. A Lambda function reads S3 metadata and stores in DynamoDB. A function is triggered by the S3 object for storage. How should Lambda function be given DynamoDB access? Create an IAM service role with permissions to write to the DynamoDB table. Associate that role with the Lambda function. Lambda functions use execution roles to access AWS services. Creating an IAM role with DynamoDB write permissions and associating with the Lambda function allows AWS security best practices for service-to-service authentication without embedding credentials. A company has privileged users who are administrators of key resources. Mandates to enhance security authentication. How can this be accomplished? Enable MFA for these user accounts. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, adds an additional security layer for privileged users by requiring both password and second factor, usually a hardware token or a mobile application. This significantly reduces the risk of account compromise for high privileged users. An application on EC2 must access username passwords stored in SSM parameter store as secure string using default KMS CMK. Which configuration helps allow API access? Add permission to read SSM parameter to EC2 instance role. Add permission to use KMS key to decrypt to an EC2 instance role. The secure string parameters require both SSM get parameter permission to retrieve the parameter and KMS decrypt permission for the KMS key used to encrypt the parameter. Both permissions must be in the EC2 instance role. Automatic key rotation enabled for existing CMK where backing key is managed by AWS. After how long is the key rotated? 3 years. AWS managed CMKs are automatically rotated every 3 years. 1,095 days, and this rotation schedule cannot be changed. Customer-managed CMKs can be rotated annually, but AWS managed keys follow the fixed 3-year schedule. A web server and SQL Server database on separate EC2 instances. Web tier is accessed from the internet. Which security group rules allow secure and functional applications? WG-123 to allow ports 80 and 443 from all IPs, and DB345 to allow the port 1433 from WG-123. The web tier needs HTTP, HTTPS access from the internet users, and the database tier should only accept connections from the web tier security group on SQL Server port 1433, implementing network segmentation and least privilege access. Custom bucket policy for app bucket object access fails with action does not apply to any resources in the statement error. What should be done to rectify the error? Change the resource section to ARN AWS S3 app bucket /star. The S3 object actions getObject and getObject version require object level resources ARN with the suffix. The bucket ARN without the slash only applies to bucket level operations, not object operations. So that could be anything in the folders or subfolders or objects in the direct bucket. A company wants intrusion detection systems for VPC with complete control over the system. What would be ideal to implement? Use custom solutions based in the available in the AWS Marketplace. The Marketplace offers third-party intrusion detection and prevention systems that provide complete control and customization. These solutions can be deployed in VPCs and configured according to specific security requirements. IT security mandates all data on EBS volumes for EC2 instances must be encrypted. Which can help achieve this? AWS KMS API. AWS KMS provides encryption keys for EBS volume encryption. KMS integrates with EBS to encrypt volumes at rest using customer-managed or AWS-managed CMKs, meeting organizational encryption requirements. S3 bucket hosts promotional videos need to provide user access for limited duration. How can this be achieved? Use pre-signed URLs. Pre-signed URLs provide time-limited access to S3 objects without requiring AWS credentials. They can be generated with specific expiration times and permissions, allowing temporary access to private objects. A company mandates all calls to AWS KMS service must be recorded. How can this be achieved? Enable Trail with CloudTrail. CloudTrail captures all KMS API calls and delivers logs to S3. This provides a complete audit trail of KMS operations, including who made the requests, when they were made, and what operations are being performed. You need to get a list of vulnerabilities for EC2 instances according to the Center for Internet Security Guidelines, CIS. How can this be accomplished? AWS Inspector. Inspector performs security assessments of EC2 instances using rule packages, including CIS benchmarks. Inspector evaluates instances against industry best practices and provides detailed vulnerability findings and remediation guidance. An instance promoted from test to production. IT security reports unknown IP traffic to port 22. How can this be mitigated immediately? Remove the rule for incoming traffic on port 22 for the security group. The security groups act as a virtual firewall controlling inbound and outbound traffic. Removing the overly permissive SSH rule, likely all IPs, immediately blocks unauthorized access attempts while keeping the application running normally. Company wants to identify security groups allowing unrestricted access to resources over 6 months. What is the best option to accomplish this? Use AWS Trusted Advisor to see which security groups have compromised access. AWS Trusted Advisor includes security checks that identify security groups with unrestricted access, all IPs, on specific ports. This provides automatic detection of potentially risky security group configurations across the account. A company using CloudTrail to log API activity. The CISO requests additional protection for log file integrity. What combination protects log files from alteration? Create an S3 bucket in a dedicated log account with write-only access for other accounts. Enable CloudTrail log file integrity validation. Centralized logging with write-only access prevents log tampering. And log file integrity validation provides cryptographic proof using SHA-256 hashing and digital signatures to detect any modifications, deletions, or forgeries. You've received an email from AWS support stating the account might be compromised. What steps should be taken? Change the root account password, rotate all IAM access keys, and change the password for all IAM users. Account compromise responses require immediate credential rotation, securing the root account, invalidating potentially compromised access keys, and securing all user accounts. Resources should be reviewed and suspicious ones terminated, not kept running. The IT security team wants to conduct penetration tests on AWS resources for security analysis. What should be done first? Submit a request to AWS support. AWS requires prior approval for penetration testing on AWS resources. Customers must submit a penetration testing request form to AWS support and receive authorization before conducting security tests, though many common services no longer require approval. VPC machines need authentication using private certificates with minimal maintenance work. What is the ideal way to fulfill this request? AWS Certificate Manager. ACM can issue private certificates through ACM Private Certificate Authority, PCA. This provides automated certificate lifecycle management, reducing operational overhead compared to managing on-premises certificate authorities. CloudTrail logs enable for company account. IT security requires logs to be encrypted. How can this be achieved? There is no need to do anything since logs will already be encrypted. CloudTrail automatically encrypts log files using Amazon S3 server-side encryption by default. Additional encryption with AWS KMS keys can be optionally configured. Basic encryption is provided automatically without additional configuration. Web and database tier and VPC are unable to reach the application homepage despite verified security groups. What can help diagnose the issue? VPC flow logs can do this. Flow logs capture network traffic information for VPCs, subnets, and network interfaces. They help troubleshoot connectivity issues by showing whether traffic is being accepted or rejected, helping identify routing, security group, or NACL issues. Security team creating incident response plan to determine if employees' IAM permissions change during an incident. What steps should be documented? Use AWS config to examine an employee's IAM permissions prior to an incident and compare it to the current permissions. Config tracks configuration changes over time, including IAM resources. Config's configuration history provides point-in-time views of IAM permissions, enabling comparison between pre-incident and current states for forensic analysis. The security team needs daily reports of EC2 instances and on-premises servers missing security patches with 24-hour compliance requirements. How can requirements be fulfilled? Use Systems Manager Patch Manager to generate, report, and install missing patches. Systems Manager Patch Manager provides automated patch management for both EC2 instances and on-premises servers. It can generate compliance reports and automatically install missing patches, meeting both reporting and remediation requirements. The dev team started using a new AWS account. IT security is worried about AWS key leakage. What's the first level of protection measures? Delete AWS keys for the root account. The security best practice prioritizing eliminating root account access keys as the first security step. Root account keys provide unlimited access to all account resources, making their removal the most critical initial security measure. Identifying what is not a best practice for security audits. Which is not? Conducting the audit on a yearly basis. Annual audits are too infrequent for effective security management. Best practices recommend periodic audits based on organizational changes, service additions and removals, and suspected security incidents and other triggers rather than fixed yearly schedules. Identifying secure methods for logging into EC2 Linux instances, which is used as a secure way to log into EC2 Linux instance. Key pairs. Key pairs, like public-private key cryptography, provide secure authentication for EC2 Linux instances. The private key is used for authentication, while AWS validates using the corresponding public key, eliminating password-based vulnerabilities. A critical web application needs immediate action capability against potential DDoS attacks. What should be done? Consider using AWS Shield Advanced service. Shield Advanced provides enhanced DDoS protection with 24/7 access to DDoS response team, DRT, near real-time attack notifications, and advanced attack mitigation tools. It enables immediate response capabilities that Basic Shield doesn't provide. Applications across two VPCs with peering connections are established, but applications cannot communicate. What troubleshooting steps should be taken? Check the route tables for the VPCs. VPC peering requires route table updates to direct traffic between VPCs. After establishing peering connection, route tables in both VPCs must be updated with routes pointing to the peer VPC CIDR blocks through the peering connection. Companies requiring AWS stored data to be encrypted at rest. Which approaches achieve this requirement? When storing data in EBS, encrypt volumes using AWS KMS. When storing data in S3, enable server-side encryption. EBS encryption using KMS encrypts data at rest on storage volumes, and S3 server-side encryption protects objects at rest in S3. Both provide transparent encryption without application changes. You need to ensure S3 bucket objects are available in another region due to data criticality. How do you achieve this in the easiest way? Enable cross-region replication for the bucket. S3 cross-region replication, CRR, automatically replicates objects to destination buckets in different regions. It provides automated asynchronous copying with built-in monitoring and management capabilities. You need to monitor active EBS volumes, snapshots, and elastic IPs to avoid exceeding service limits. What service can help? Trusted Advisor. AWS Trusted Advisor monitors service limits across multiple AWS services, including EBS volumes, snapshots, and elastic IP addresses. It provides proactive alerts when approaching service limits and recommendations for limit increases. A legacy application outputs logs to a local text file. All AWS application logs must be monitored for security messages. What can be done to deploy in EC2 and meet monitoring requirements? Send the local text log files to CloudWatch logs and configure CloudWatch metric filter. Trigger CloudWatch alarms based on the metrics. CloudWatch logs agent can forward local log files to CloudWatch logs. Metric filters can search for security-related patterns, and CloudWatch alarms can trigger automated responses when security events are detected. The security team wants to prevent root user and all IAM users in production accounts from accessing specific unneeded services across multiple AWS accounts. How can this functionality be controlled? Create a service control policy that denies access to services. Assemble production accounts in the organizational unit. Apply the policy to that organizational unit. AWS organization service control policies provide guardrails that override account-level permissions by organizing production accounts into an organization unit and applying restrictive SEPs. The security team can enforce service restrictions that even account administrators cannot override. An application on EC2 instances and public subnets must call external web service via TLS port 443 while minimizing instance exposure. What configurations allow functionality with minimal exposure? Network ACL with rules allowing outgoing traffic on port 443 and incoming traffic on ephemeral ports. Security groups with rules allowing outgoing traffic on port 443. NACLs are stateless and require explicit rules for both outbound port 443 and return traffic, ephemeral ports, while security groups are stateful and only need outbound rules since return traffic is automatically allowed. Company deploying web applications expects frequent DDoS attacks based on previous applications. Which steps protect the application? Use the Elastic Load Balancer, Application Load Balancer, and Auto-Scaling group to scale and absorb application layer traffic. Use CloudFront and AWS WAF to prevent malicious traffic from reaching applications. The ALB with auto-scaling provides elastic capacity to handle traffic spikes, and CloudFront with WAF provides edge protection, filtering malicious requests before they reach the origin infrastructure. A media industry web application allowing photo uploads needs to call S3 API while maintaining maximum security for API credentials. Where should the API credentials be stored? Don't save API credentials. Instead, create an IAM role and assign this to an EC2 instance when created. IAM roles provide temporary, automatically rotated credentials without embedding long-term access keys in applications. This eliminates credential management overhead and reduces security risks from credential exposure or theft. All API calls to AWS resources must be monitored and stored for lookup. Data older than 6 months must be archived. Which combination meets these requirements? Enable CloudTrail logging in all accounts into S3 buckets. Ensure a lifecycle policy is defined on the S3 bucket to move data to Amazon Glacier after 6 months. CloudTrail captures all AWS API calls and stores logs in S3, providing comprehensive audit trail, and S3 lifecycle policies automatically transition older logs to Glacier for cost-effective long-term archives. There's also a new Glacier delineation, so look that up. The company has 1,000 EC2 instances and wants to effectively automate administrative tasks. Which would be effective for achieving this? AWS Systems Manager Run Command. Systems Manager Run Command enables remote execution of administrative tasks across large fleets of EC2 instances and on-premises servers. It provides centralized, secure command execution at scale without requiring SSH access to individual instances. You want to launch an EC2 instance with its own key pair in AWS. How can this be achieved? Use a third-party tool to create the key pair. Create a new key pair using AWS CLI. Import a public key into EC2. Key pairs can be created externally with third-party tools, generated via AWS CLI, or created in the console. Only the public key is imported to AWS. The private key remains with the user for secure authentication. You want to stop using a couple of KMS keys but are unsure which services currently use them. What is the safe option to stop using keys from further usage? Disable the keys. Disabling the KMS keys prevents new encrypt-decrypt operations while preserving existing encrypted data and the ability to re-enable if needed. This provides the safest way to test the impact before permanent deletion, which is irreversible. A large-scale confidential documentation server on S3 that cannot be publicly accessible directly must use CloudFront. Which method satisfies the requirements? Create Origin Access Identity, OAI, for CloudFront and grant access to S3 bucket objects to that OAI. The OAI, Origin Access Identity, is a CloudFront feature that provides secure access to S3 content. By configuring S3 bucket policy to allow access only from the OAI, direct S3 URLs become inaccessible while maintaining CloudFront access. All right. Company policy requires all services have logging enabled. You need to ensure logging always is enabled for created S3 buckets. How can you ensure logging is always enabled? Use config rules to check whether logging is enabled for buckets. AWS config provides managed rules like S3 bucket logging enable that automatically evaluates S3 buckets for logging configuration. Config rules can trigger remediation actions and provide continuous app compliance monitoring. A security engineer must monitor infrastructure for compliance deviations, specific AMIs, encrypted EVS volumes, and terminate non-compliant resources. What combination of steps should be implemented? Trigger a Lambda function from a scheduled CloudWatch event that terminates non-compliant infrastructure. Monitor compliance with AWS config rules triggered by configuration changes. Config rules monitor resource compliance against defined standards, and Lambda functions triggered by CloudWatch events can automate remediation by terminating non-compliant resources based on config findings. External vendors with cross-account access must deliver files to company's S3 bucket. Which combination of steps must the vendor follow? Add a grant to the object's ACL, giving full permission to the bucket owner. Upload the file to the company's S3 bucket. Vendors upload objects to the bucket, but must set the object ACL to grant bucket owner permissions since cross-account uploaded objects are owned by the uploader, not the bucket owner. An EC2 application must access sensitive data center data with encryption in transit and consistent low latency. Which hybrid architecture meets these requirements? A VPN between VPC and data center over direct connect connection. Direct Connect provides consistent low latency through dedicated network connection, while VPN over Direct Connect adds encryption layers for sensitive data transmission, combining performance and security requirements. The company has several CMKs, including some with imported key material. Each CMK must be rotated annually. Which two methods can rotate the key, or each key? Enable automatic key rotation for CMK, import new key material to new CMK, point the key alias to the new CMK. So automatic rotation works for AWS managed key material, while manual rotation via new CMK with alias redirection is required for imported key material, since automatic rotation doesn't support imported keys. An application in private subnets must transfer sensitive data to and from S3 buckets without traversing the public internet per compliance requirements. What solution meets the compliance requirement? Access S3 buckets through the VPC endpoint for S3. VPC endpoints enable private connectivity to an S3 without requiring Internet Gateway, NAT device, or VPN connection. And traffic between the VPC and S3 remains within the AWS network, meeting compliance requirements for private data transfer. The current setup has web servers and database servers, both in public subnets. Which architectural change adds better security boundaries? Consider moving the database server to a private subnet. Web servers need public internet access for user requests, but database servers should be in a private subnet accessible only from the application tier. This implements defense in depth by isolating data tiers from the direct internet exposure. The confidential documents in S3 must be available in different geographic locations for compliance. What change would comply with this requirement? Enable cross-region replication for S3 buckets. Enable S3 cross-region replication automatically replicates objects to destination buckets in different AWS regions, meeting geographic distribution requirements for compliance while maintaining data consistency and availability. Managing API gateway permissions for developers, IT admins, and users with easy management is required. What can ensure the right level of permissions are easily managed? Use IAM policies to create different policies for different types of users. IAM policies provide granular permissions for control for API gateway operations. Different policy templates can be created for various user roles like developers, admins, and users, and end users, and easily assigned to manage access to an API creation, deployment, and execution. The company hosts data in S3 with the requirement to control access to S3 buckets. What are the two ways this can be achieved? Bucket policies and IAM user policies. S3 access control uses both resource-based policies like the bucket policies or ACLs and identity-based policies like IAM users, groups, or role policies. These can be used independently or together to provide comprehensive access control to S3 resources. A critical application deployment requires PCI compliance controls and web application log monitoring for malicious activities. Which services fulfill this requirement? Amazon CloudWatch Logs and Amazon CloudTrail. CloudTrail provides governance, compliance, and risk auditing capabilities essential for PCI compliance, while CloudWatch Logs enables monitoring and analysis of application logs to identify malicious activity patterns and security incidents. A company wants to enable single sign-on for employees to log in to AWS Management Console using corporate directory identity. Which steps are required as part of the process? Create IAM policies that can be mapped to group memberships in corporate directory. Create IAM roles that establish trust relationships between IAM and corporate identity providers, or corporate directory identity providers. A SAML federation requires 1. IAM policies defining permissions for federated users based on directory group membership, and IAM roles with trust policies allowing the SAML IDP to assume roles. Direct Connect is not required for SAML federation. A company stores sensitive records in S3 with SSE KMS. Compliance requires no more than 1 month of data encrypted with the same key. Which solution meets this requirement? Trigger a Lambda function with a monthly CloudWatch event that creates a new CMK and updates the S3 bucket to use the new CMK. Automatic KMS rotation occurs annually, not monthly. Lambda function can create new CMKs monthly and update the S3 bucket default encryption. Old CMKs must be retained to decrypt previously encrypted objects. Company policy requires disabling insecure protocols like FTP, Telnet, or HTTP. A security team wants scheduled compliance checking. What process checks the EC2 instance's compliance? Amazon Inspector assessments using runtime behavior analysis rules packages against every EC2 instance. So the inspector's runtime behavior analysis rules package specifically checks for insecure protocols like FTP, Telnet, and HTTP, and other unencrypted services. It analyzes instance behavior and provides security findings for compliance validation. Web application with ELB EC2 instances, RDS database, and Bastion host requires secure configuration. Which security group configuration is secure and functional? Security group load balancer allows port 80 and 443 traffic from all IPs. Security group web allows port 80 and 443 traffic from the security group load balancer. Security group database allows port 3306 traffic from the security web and security bastion. And security group bastion allows port 22 traffic from corporate IP address ranges. This follows a defense in depth standard. The ELB accepts internet traffic. The web instances only accept traffic from the ELB. The database only accepts traffic from the web and bastion, and the bastion only accepts SSH from a corporate network. Extending on-premises infrastructure to AWS requiring traffic encryption and minimal latency. Which solutions fulfill the requirements? AWS VPN and Direct Connect. A VPN provides encrypted tunnels for secure traffic. Direct Connect offers dedicated low-latency connections. VPN over Direct Connect combines encryption with consistent performance for hybrid connectivity. Ensure VPC instances don't use AWS DNS for routing. You want to use your own managed DNS instances. How can this be achieved? Create a new DHCP option set and replace the existing one. DHCP option sets control DNS resolution for VPC instances. Creating a new DHCP option set with a custom DNS server, IP addresses, and associating it with the VPC directs all DNS queries to the custom DNS infrastructure. Windows machine in one VPC needs to join Active Directory domain in another VPC. VPC peering is established, but the domain join is not working. What additional step is needed? Ensure security groups for Active Directory hosted subnets have the right rules for relevant subnets. VPC peering enables network connectivity, but security groups must allow the specific ports required for the Active Directory communication. So DNS, Kerberos, LDAP, SMB. Between the VPCs for domain join operations to succeed. You need cloud security devices to generate encryption keys based on FIPS 140-2 Level 3 standards. What can be used for this? CloudHSM. AWS CloudHSM provides FIPS 140-2 Level 3 validated single-tenant hardware security modules, while AWS KMS uses FIPS 140-2 validated HSMs. CloudHSM provides Level 3 validation with dedicated hardware under exclusive customer control. You need to store S3 objects with automatically managed and rotated keys. Which can be used? AWS S3 server-side encryption. Server-side encryption with S3 managed keys automatically manages and rotates encryption keys. Each object is encrypted with a unique key, and AWS handles all key management and rotation operations transparently. Wait, where was I? I just did that. Just did that. Okay, here we go. All right. Critical S3 data needs extra security level and availability in a second region if the primary goes down. What fulfills the requirements? Enable bucket versioning and also enable CRR, cross-region replication. So for the bucket policy, add the condition for null AWS multi-factor authentication age is true. So cross-region replication ensures data availability in a second region. And MFA conditions in a bucket policy adds extra security by requiring multi-factor authentication for S3 operations. A company manages thousands of EC2 instances with a mandate to ensure no critical security flaws. What ensures this requirement? AWS Inspector to ensure servers have no critical flaws, and AWS SSM to patch servers. Inspector performs automated security assessments to identify vulnerabilities and security flaws, and SSM and Systems Manager Patch Manager automates patching across EC2 fleets to remediate identified vulnerabilities. You need to inspect running processes on EC2 instances with security issues without interfering with instance operation. How do you achieve this the easiest way? Use SSM run command to send lists of running processes information to an S3 bucket. Systems Manager run command can execute OS operating system commands remotely to capture running process information and send outputs to S3 without disrupting instance operation. This provides non-intrusive forensic data collection. Some EC2 systems are not getting covered in Systems Manager patching process, which can troubleshoot this issue. Check if the right role assigned to EC2 instances, ensure the agent is running on instances, and check the instance status using Health API. SSM requires proper IAM role for Systems Manager API communication and an SSM agent running on instances. And Health API shows the agent status and heartbeat information for troubleshooting connectivity issues. AWS Systems Manager run command is not working on a set of instances. How do you diagnose the issue? Ensure the SSM agent is running on the target machine. Check the var log Amazon SSM errors.log file. SSM agent must be running for run command to function, and agent error logs provide detailed information about connectivity and execution issues for troubleshooting. How do you set up federated authentication between AWS and on-premises Active Directory? What are the important steps? Ensure the right match between on-prem Active Directory groups and IAM roles. Configure AWS as a relying party in the Active Directory Federation services. A SAML assertions map Active Directory group membership to AWS IAM roles for access control. And AWS must be configured as the relying party in Active Directory Federated System services to establish trust relationships for federation. You want to integrate AWS IAM with on-premises LDAP directory service. Which technique can be used? Use SAML, Security Assertion Markup Language, to enable single sign-on between AWS and LDAP. SAML provides standard framework for exchanging authentication and authorization data between identity providers, LDAP, and service providers, AWS, enabling single sign-on integration with existing LDAP directories. EBS volumes encrypted with KMS customer key. Someone deleted the customer key used for EBS encryption. What should be done to ensure the data can be decrypted? You cannot decrypt data that was encrypted under the CMK, and the data is not recoverable. KMS key deletion is irreversible and destructive. Once a CMK is deleted, all data encrypted with that key becomes permanently inaccessible. No recovery mechanism exists for deleted CMKs, making the encrypted data unrecoverable. A suspicious API activity occurred 11 days ago. The security admins need to retrieve API activity from that time. How can this be achieved? Search CloudTrail event history on API events which occurred 11 days ago. CloudTrail event history retains API activity for 90 days by default. The event history can be searched to find suspicious API calls from 11 days ago, providing detailed audit trail for security investigations. You need to ensure CloudTrail logs delivered to AWS account are encrypted. How can this be achieved in the easiest way? Don't do anything since CloudTrail logs are automatically encrypted. CloudTrail automatically encrypts log files to using Amazon S3 server-side encryption by default. Additional encryption with customer-managed KMS keys can be configured if needed, but basic encryption is provided automatically. You need to serve private content using keys available with CloudFront. How can this be achieved? Create pre-signed URLs. CloudFront signed URLs and signed cookies use CloudFront key pairs to provide time-limited access to private content. Pre-signed URLs contain authentication information that CloudFront validates before serving restricted content to users. IT security suspects possible DDoS attacks on EC2 instances in a VPC. They need to identify the IP addresses receiving a flurry of requests. How can you zero in on the IP addresses accessing the EC2 instances? Use your VPC flow logs to get the IP addresses accessing EC2 instances. VPC flow logs capture information about IP traffic going to and from network interfaces in your VPC. This data shows source and destination IP addresses, enabling identification of potential DDoS attack patterns by analyzing traffic volume and source IPs. Building a system to distribute confidential training videos using CloudFront. Content stored in S3 is not publicly available from the S3 directly. What method serves content from S3 through CloudFront while preventing direct S3 access? Origin Access Identity, OAI, for CloudFront, and grants access to S3 bucket objects to that OAI. OAI, Origin Access Identity, creates a special CloudFront user that can access S3 content. By configuring S3 bucket policy to allow access only from the OAI and removing public access, content becomes accessible only through CloudFront URLs. An employee is in charge of a root account, and has left the company. You need to secure the account. What must be done to secure it? Delete access keys for the root account, confirm MFA to a secure device, and change the password for the root account. When the root account access is potentially compromised, delete the root access keys to prevent programmatic access, configure MFA on a secure device for additional authentication, and change the root password to invalidate previous credentials. A company developed an incident response plan 18 months ago with regular implementations, but no updates since creation. What is the correct statement about the plan? The response plan does not cater to new services. AWS continuously introduces new services and features. An 18-month-old incident response plan without updates likely doesn't address security considerations for newly launched services, making it incomplete for current AWS environments. An application uses customer keys from AWS KMS and US East region, and they want to use the same keys from the EU Central region. How can this be accomplished? This is not possible, since keys from KMS are region-specific. KMS keys are region-specific and cannot be transferred or used across regions. Keys created in one region are only stored and used within that region. Cross-region applications require separate keys in each region because encryption standards have to meet regulations for security in those regions. The laws in one region are not going to be the same as the laws in another. The regulations, the same. You need to conduct penetration testing on AWS Cloud for a couple of EC2 instances. How do you proceed? Get prior approval from AWS for conducting the test, and use pre-approved penetration testing tools. AWS penetration testing requires prior approval through penetration testing request forms and the use of approved tools and methodologies. While policies have relaxed for many services, formal approval may still be required for comprehensive testing. An S3 bucket needs to be accessed by a partner account securely. What is the most secure way? Ensure an IAM role is created which can be assumed by the partner account. Ensure the partner uses external ID when making the request. Provide an ARN for the role to the partner account. Secure cross-account access requires an IAM role with a trust policy for the partner account, an external ID for additional security against confused deputy attacks, and a role ARN for the partner to assume the role. A company needs to ensure KMS keys are only used for certain services, like one key only for S3 service. How can this be achieved? Use the KMS via service condition in the key policy. The KMS via service condition key in the KMS key policy restricts key usage to requests from specific AWS resources. This ensures keys can only be used by designated services, providing service-level access control. A customer key created 6 months ago using KMS and cannot use the new KMS features for existing keys. What could be the reason? You have not explicitly given access via the key policy. When new KMS features are released, existing keys with default policies may not automatically include permissions for the new policies. So key policies need to explicitly update to enable access to the new KMS capabilities. Web applications on EC2 in a public subnet need to connect to the Oracle database on a separate EC2 instance. Which steps ensure secure setup? Place the EC2 instance with the Oracle database in a separate private subnet. Create a database security group and ensure the web security group has allowed incoming access. Database servers should be in private subnets for security isolation. And security groups should allow communication only between web and database tiers, not from internet to database. EC2 instances host Java applications accessing DynamoDB tables. Instances serve production users. What is a secure way to ensure EC2 instances access DynamoDB? Use IAM roles with permissions to interact with DynamoDB and assign this to an EC2 instance. IAM roles provide temporary, automatically rotated credentials for EC2 instances to access AWS services securely. This eliminates the need to store long-term access keys on instances and follows AWS Security's best practices. EC2 application processes sensitive S3 data accessed over the internet. A security team is concerned about the internet connectivity risk. What solution will resolve the security concern? Access the data through a VPC endpoint for Amazon S3. VPC endpoints enable private connectivity to S3 without internet gateway, NAT device, or VPN connection. Traffic between the VPC and S3 remains within the AWS network, eliminating internet security risks. Development teams store log files in S3 buckets. You need to keep logs for 1 month and then purge automatically. Which feature enables this requirement? Configuring a lifecycle configuration rules on the S3 bucket. S3 lifecycle policies allow automatic management of object lifecycles, including expiration actions and delete objects after specific time periods. This provides automatic log retention and purging without manual intervention. Redshift clusters store data warehouses. Internal IT security requires data encryption for a Redshift database. How can this be achieved? Use AWS KMS Customer Default Master Key. Amazon Redshift supports encryption at rest using AWS KMS Customer Master Keys. KMS manages the top-level encryption keys in Redshift's encryption hierarchy, providing comprehensive data encryption for the cluster. You want to monitor all API activity for all regions, including future regions. What fulfills this requirement? Ensure one CloudTrail trail is enabled for all regions. CloudTrail supports multi-region trails that automatically capture API activity from all regions and extends to new regions when AWS launches them. This provides comprehensive coverage with single trail configuration. An instance in AWS public cloud with default NACL settings needs to provide IT administrators secure access. How can this be accomplished? Ensure the security group allows inbound SSH traffic from the IT admin's workstation. Default NACLs allow all traffic, so security groups control access. Enabling inbound SSH from the admin's specific IP address in the instance security group provides secure administrative access. Running administrative scripts using a AWS Lambda service, you need to understand the errors encountered during the script execution. How do you accomplish this the most effectively? Use CloudWatch metrics and logs to watch for errors. AWS Lambda automatically integrates with CloudWatch for monitoring. Lambda metrics track function performance and errors, while CloudWatch logs capture function output and error messages, providing comprehensive error monitoring. A company hosts data in S3. A new mandate requires all future S3 bucket data to be encrypted at rest. How can this be achieved? Enable server-side encryption on an S3 bucket. Server-side encryption automatically encrypts objects when stored and decrypts them when accessed. Default bucket encryption ensures all new objects are automatically encrypted without the application changes. There's an issue with communication between an application and database servers. You need minimal steps to troubleshoot just application database connectivity. What are the ideal minimal troubleshooting steps? Check inbound security rules for database security groups and outbound security rules for application security groups. For application to database communication, verify Outbound rules on the application security group allow traffic to the database port, and inbound rules on the database security group allow traffic from the application security group. The company requirement is to work with the DynamoDB table with security mandate for encryption at rest. What's the easiest way to accomplish this for DynamoDB? Encrypt DynamoDB tables using KMS during its creation. DynamoDB encryption at rest is the most easily enabled during table creation using AWS KMS managed keys. This provides transparent encryption with no application changes required and eliminates operational complexity. That will be all for today for part 2. Next, we're coming up with part 3. I look to join you then. Thank you.